we're going to talk a little bit about the visitor mindset, the visitor perspective. And partly this is timely because in about a month, if all goes according to Hoyle and the Lord continues to bless us and have us progress, you guys are going to be meeting in a very different place. And there's going to be an obligation to use the place wisely, which means that it's not the thing to do all the time, but it's to fill up the square footage with people. So, let me pause for a second. Anybody that's hanging out on our call this morning, anybody have interactions or invitations from sororities or fraternities, either at a certain time in your life or perhaps back when you might have been on a campus someplace?
Nope.
College at Sarah, we didn't have them.
Yeah, we didn't have them at our school. They might have them now, but they didn't have them back in the dark ages.
Gotcha. Okay, so I've got my wife here, I've got Bruce there, and I've got folks saying, necessarily the times that we were part of school didn't say that they were part of the college life. It was very, very much a part of my college experience. And to the point where I had been approached by 3 different groups. And the thing I think that I was able to convey that I've learned very, very much over the years is I'm not fraternity material. So, and to put it lightly, you don't want me in your club. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit with you about why that may be the case. But I want you also to look at potentially the bigger and the grander picture that we discussed this morning. So, are you guys familiar with the fact that fraternities and sororities, and until the day of social media, a very, very big deal was placed on not only the rituals of fraternities and sororities, but the initiation.
Yes.
And I mentioned until the time of social media, because one of the things that regularly happened with initiation is you would have some candidates sometimes die during the course of initiation. Why do you think that was?
Dumb people do dumb stuff.
Say again?
Nothing.
People wanting to fit in somewhere, willing to do anything.
Yeah, very, very much. And so now there's a lot of laws and there's a curtailing of the Greek life on campuses because of social media and its exposure, its spotlight on these practices that for probably about 100 years were very, very rampant on college campuses. And I'm not even talking about secret organizations like Skull and Bones or some of those places. I'm talking about, Sigma Chi, the AKAs, which are the ladies, the alphas, okay? And so I'm gonna give you some pictures that are gonna sound a little bit odd in a couple seconds, but I want you to have those on purpose. I like that you guys just said a couple of moments ago, folks wanted to fit in, and so they would do what seemed to be nuts. And so it makes sense that fraternities, sororities are not for everyone, right? Because if you're not willing to kind of do anything or whatever it takes in order to kind of be a part of, then that's, for instance, why this guy, you don't want me in your club. And my observation on my campus, we had a very, very distinct separation between the Caucasian Greek life and the Black Greek life. I appreciate you guys recognizing that. And so I can tell you almost immediately, I was invited or I was approached by folks because of my tan in the Black Greek life community. And from the stuff that I saw those guys doing, I went, no doggone way. I'm not doing that. Appreciate the laughter, appreciate the understanding. And I say that because if For those of you who've not been familiar with that, if you've seen the Black Greek life at the time when some of us were in school, there was a book that a lot of young men had.
Story of the book.
All right, Ellen is cracking up in the room here. It's a book that you had to have with you at all times. At all times. If you did not, your membership / your butt was in jeopardy. Okay, so Ellen has a story on that. I'm going to pivot.
It's not. It's hysterical. You want to hear the story?
Sure.
It's not at all. Okay. So, yes. Whoops. Oh, there. Thank you. Yeah, there you are. So yeah, there was this gentleman. His name was Peter Bernard. He was Jamaican.
What's his name?
And he was joining a Black fraternity. And they had the outfits, they had the books, and they did the step and stuff on the campus. Now, he liked hanging out with myself and my roommate. Neither one of us would be part of this fraternity or the sorority because we were white people. But he came over and he didn't take seriously the darn book because one time he, I don't know, there we go. One time he was in our room and my roommate Yolanda had, I think, a pair of flip-flops in a similar bag as the book. And so she thought she was taking her flip-flops to return them to the store, and she takes his book. he takes her flip-flops. And so she was freaking out. I don't think he was freaking out by it. I thought it was hysterical, but Yolanda was hysterical because she gets to the store trying to return a pair of flip-flops and she's got the dude's book. So, it was fun.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that information. That, I'm sure, informed millions of listeners across the United States. Anyway, what it is saying is that there were routines and rituals that just were extreme. And for those of you that have had association with this, you know we're not making this stuff up. So whether it's chains or whether it's branding or whether it's a book or whether it's a step show, if you're unfamiliar with the step show, back before hip hop and rap and that sort of culture became prominent, the Greek life of the Black frats had all of that as a part of it. And it was competitive. It was also competitive from a testosterone level. Now, that's in comparison to, say, the Caucasian Greek life, which was very, very much welcomed by lots of drinking and lots of inebriation. Very, very, very different kind of presentation. But here's really the overarching fact. If you wanted to be in the frat, you needed to be a part of what the frats did. You needed to be initiated into the frat so that the more significant routines, rituals, and activities were those that became familiar to you. Those that became in some ways not only familiar, but welcomed by you. And those ultimately that you look for in other folks. So let me pause there for a moment. And if you've got a question or you want to reflect back, take a moment to do that.
I'm trying not to ask the question that's on my mind, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Was the girl freaking out because of the nature of the book, or because she just didn't have the flip flops that she wanted to return? I'm just kind of concerned about it. She goes and pulls out this book. Is the risque in its content? I don't understand.
No. You know, Black fraternities. I think they would do the step in. They didn't drink a lot. I don't even know if they drank at all. So it was the fact that she knew he was breaking the rules by not having the book with him. And so that was very upsetting to her. And of course, there's no cell phones then. So it wasn't like you could call him up and say, hey, I got your book. You know, you had to go back to the dorm and hope he figures it out and shows up and swap bags. So
before he needs to show in to his reporting big brother.
I understand. Thank you.
All right. And again, this happened back in the 30s and 40s before there was modern technology.
Yeah, and electricity. You had to use candles to find it. Okay, got it.
So I guess I'm okay that you guys are okay that these are things that were not only expectations, but that people were head over heels looking for an invitation to join these particular societies.
Hey,
Yes,
Preston, did you guys? I think the black fraternities at UVA were like paramilitary organizations. And if I'm right about this, because we had a guy that was a friend, and he was an Omega.
Oh yeah.
Everybody wants to be an Omega, and they branded those guys with an Omega on their arm. And I saw him not long after he got it. It was still healing.
Right.
I was blown away by that.
Yeah. And it was usually sometimes with like a mat, or depending on how they would do it, and they would make the Omega on the shoulder. And when you talk,
they did it in Virginia. They did it with a clothes hanger that they heated up. And like a brand.
Right.
Yep.
And when you talk about paramilitary kind of operation, part of that is because typically you could identify the folks pledging black frats because they were wearing fatigues.
Really?
And boots. And whenever you saw them as pledges, they were running across the campus holding their books.
Our guys didn't wear uniforms, but they all wore most combat boots, mostly with white laces, to kind of set them apart.
Right. And all of that had significance. The color of the laces, sometimes the type of boots, the type of fatigue you might be wearing, the book, how you carried it, by the way, you also had to then greet your big brothers in public a certain way. So you would line up as though you were in a military line, and you would be subservient to your big brothers publicly until in many ways you had been broken so that you could be invited into the frat, and then eventually you would go and invite or approach potentially new recruits. What's the purpose of this craziness I just described to you? What's the purpose?
Acceptance.
I guess it depends on your perspective. From one perspective, it seems like, yes, acceptance. But on the other hand, it seems like if I'm going through this, I want to eventually get to the place where I can get somebody else to be subservient to me and actually become somebody important on campus.
See, and this is cool why we're talking about this, because even though it's a cultural kind of cutting point, we're missing the big picture. So the little picture is acceptance. The little picture. But the big picture is kind of what Bruce, and I hope you saw him. What Bruce was doing was telling you what the big picture is. Here's partly why. Because perhaps we don't have association or affiliation or even an appreciation for Greek life and what you do with that has an everlasting commitment and connection in your life. And thus, if you're a Delta, if you're an Omega, if you're Sigma Chi, if you are you proudly, if you don't put that after your name, you put it someplace on your resume. You put it someplace on your bumper sticker, because that does a couple of things. It identifies you, it opens doors, and it creates connectivity and relationships, sometimes with people you don't even know that you know. Am I close? Does that kind of make sense for you guys who get the bigger picture there?
Okay.
So in the short term, it's about acceptance. And that's perhaps why some folks who have a little less confidence, some folks who may be legacies, some folks who may be concerned about their success during their college years, and not so much these days, because social media has changed things a great deal. But in those days, one of the reasons you would be a part of Greek life is you were almost guaranteed you're going to get a great job coming out of school.
Yeah. No, it's so active in the community, because I have people that on my staff.
Can you hear Ellen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's people that I've worked with that part of mostly women that black women in sororities. They'd go to vacations with their sorority sisters. They would have a community service activity that they would do once a month with their sorority sisters. So it's jobs, it's a networking opportunity. So that's still true today.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, the brother there waving his hand.
Yeah. For some of these sororities and organizations or whatever, there's a class thing associated. Because I was researching this a bit when the Ivy Leagues kind of opened up scholarships and they allowed, poor people to enter and things like that. Greek life became another layer of separation to keep the elites separated from the scholarship kids and everything else, because it would cost another $20,000 a year to be part of this sorority or club or whatever it is. And it kept that, those legacy families, separated from the others, though occasionally, to pat themselves on the back, they might have one from that class. And reading about it, interestingly enough, he was an African-American guy who got into this all-white club or whatever. And he said, they brought him into that club and he was a part of it. But there was still always this separation between him and the others that were part of that. And yet he still got the benefits of the networking afterwards and everything else. But networking means you're not just going to get a good job. You're going to get a job at, Goldman Sachs or something like that. Something that's going to get you minimum of $500,000 a year or whatever. And it's not, it is expected, and you're part of that legacy family. You didn't just go to Harvard. You went to Harvard and you were part of Delta Kappa, whatever, just like you said. So that's my understanding.
Yeah, that stratification is certainly a part, and it exists there. And goodness knows we could probably talk about this for a while, because it was part of a presentation I did years ago. I didn't know that I'd be revisiting it today for these purposes. But it's to say that when you look sometimes externally into a fraternity or sorority or sororities we had on our campuses even eventually, you see things that look strange. But once you become inundated and once you become a part of the community, the strange becomes familiar, the strange becomes expected, the strange becomes valued. And you almost don't allow membership or even association with folks whose values don't mirror those that you have grown to have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me share this with you, and then we'll kind of jump in this in a way, hopefully that makes a kind of sense. So we've had some feedback from some folks, and we've asked them, what works, what doesn't work about our gatherings. And you guys in Virginia, you're going to have to figure out what that looks like, right? And I think that having that tweaked and having that eventually being something that progresses to the point where it works to do exactly what Steve talked about, that it creates a sense of radical obedience and that it creates reproducing disciples, right? So saying that, when you have seeker-friendly churches, when you have sometimes church plants, because the desire to succeed is one that sometimes numbers and money, because depending on the support that these groups are getting, sometimes they're supported up to 5 years by their commissioning body. So they it's almost like a restaurant. They're not expected to show gain over this. They've got 5 years to potentially take a loss. But in year number 6, there's an expectation that we can pull the funding. You can subsist on your own. And sometimes what happens is environments get created where people are members or they're participants or they're congregants, and You have a mile wide, inch deep kind of allegorical community. You got a whole lot of people that hang out that say, "Oh, we love that. We love that Steve Captain. The captains are there, right?" And the church has got tons of people, but there's no depth. There's no sense of stick-to-itiveness. And in fact, there's probably no sense of really why are we doing this other than we're doing it. So we've had some folks give some comments, and some of those comments are some of these. Your sermon time needs to be less. Too much music. The gathering on Sunday is too long. It needs to be a shorter interval because I've got things to do. I've got places to go, or I've got friends and family to meet. So, my challenge to us, given this brief conversation, is this. Ellen and I, and we haven't done it recently because as we've gone to this virtual format, our Sundays have been plugged in with you guys for quite some time. But when they weren't, or when we would meet early enough, depending on the time situation, we've often been to churches that have sometimes up to 6 services between Saturday and Sunday. Now, I can't tell you that empirically that's a terrible thing. But I will tell you that when you shoehorn the Holy Spirit and his influence and his presence into about an hour, there's no opportunity for the Holy Spirit to have his way. And that's understand what I'm saying. The Holy Spirit can have his way, period. But we're not allowing ourselves to decrease and him to increase because we simply say, you got this much time to work. And if you don't work in there, we got a new crowd coming in. So we warehouse people. So let me pause for a second. And if you've got some feedback or some comments, go ahead. This would be a place to do it.
You said that we had comments from people. Is that people that have visited and listened in occasionally? Was that comments?
Yeah, it may be folks who come in person or folks who have joined us virtually. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. It's the way our world has gone. You know, everybody's so busy and they just can't, church happens when you got nothing else to do.
Well, you're right there, Jerry. And, when I hear people have comments that are regularly this, now please don't be offended by what I'm saying. I need to go and meet some friends. I need to go and spend time with family. So I recognize that Saturday and Sunday in our Western culture is the opportunity to potentially go and do that. But I guess the question that gets begged for me is, don't you have friends and family when and where you worship? Right? And typically the question for that goes back to the thing you've heard me say over the years. We have work friends, we have church friends, and we have real friends. And sometimes there's a rare time when those intersect, because typically we keep them all separated. So my challenge to us is this. We're doing things a certain way right now, and we do them with a very, if we've not talked about the premeditated nature of why we do the things that we do, there really is a reason. And I'll briefly try to remind us of those, because it's anticipating the big picture that Steve's going to help reinforce when he comes to town, and that you guys are going to have to decide about in order to be a drawing force for the Lord, right? So we do Jesus encounters as a way to help not only remind ourselves, but encourage ourselves, and then to inform the world that Jesus lives. He lives, and he is current, he matters, and his influence in our relationship is active as of just a couple of days ago, hopefully. And that is a differentiator between when folks typically do testimony in churches, which is 25 years ago, I gave my life to the Lord and I haven't looked back since then. And I love the Lord and he heard my cry. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, how does Jesus matter today? How did you and he spend time over? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I didn't mean to cut you off mid-sentence, but I'm almost hearing like you're saying that our commitment to Jesus is very much like a sorority pledge. And now we're part of this network where, oh my gosh, you got the Jesus fish on your car, so come on in. You got the secret handshake. You can get a good job. You're a believer. Come on in. Everything is good and all that. That's kind of what I'm hearing you. You haven't said it explicitly, but you're kind of running parallel with that right now.
Okay. So let me jump into where you are, Steve. The radical, crazy nature of what sororities and fraternities do are what we definitely need to avoid. Having people dunk themselves in a vat of moonshine for as long as they can hold it is not what we want people to do. We also don't want to necessarily be burning things into people's skins in order to have them show and demonstrate their loyalty. Plus, we don't want people bowing down before Steve and Bruce going, oh, I love these guys so much, I will do whatever it is they tell me. That's not the idea. But here's the idea. When people who are unchurched, when people who are unbelievers come into the midst of folks who are believers, they're going to encounter things that are strange. Mm-hmm. They're going to encounter things that are different. They're going to encounter things that are ritualistic or routine that happens for us. And for them, it's going to be uncomfortable. And it should be. They're not initiated into the family of Yahweh through Jesus. And that's where the seeker-friendly disconnect, sometimes we struggle with that. Because we want to make things very familiar to seekers to the point where it's unfamiliar to folks who believe in Jesus.
That's right.
And so the uninitiated are going to encounter us and they're going to see things that are strange. But the idea of us, if indeed we are plugged into the anchor, that is Jesus, we've got to demonstrate that those things that seem weird and crazy and strange are a part of what the family does. Mm-hmm. So that those folks who become initiated or want to become initiated at some point in time begin to value, begin to desire, and begin to look forward to some of what seems to be weird before they were initiated. So let me pause there. Your comments. Yes, sir.
I'm maybe going to start to beat your parable a bit too much, but two thoughts in that regard. Okay. I had a lot of other thoughts, but I want to keep it to this. I rushed fraternity my second year in college. I didn't do it as we call it first year, second year, third year at Virginia, not freshman and sophomore, etc. My second year, hey man, we were just snooty beyond all measure. I'm sorry. Mr. Jefferson's University, My roommate Mike and I rushed a couple of different places and kind of almost got sucked into one and we ran away. But good guys. But what I discovered about hanging out with them, they're very unusual, right? Because it's not dorm life, it's not living in an apartment. A frat house is way different. Mm. But one of the things that I noticed about fraternities was any guy that you bounced into when you were at one of their smokers, as they call them, or mixers, where smokers was a big name for it. Whenever you're at one of their events, it didn't matter whether it was the president of the fraternity or the last guy that got in. Any one of them could buttonhole you in a corner and tell you why you needed to be a part of their fraternity. And they knew chapter and verse, and they were excited about being in that fraternity. So, and I may be getting ahead of you, but weird in and of itself isn't going to do it. We got to be excited about our weirdness and be able to explain why we're weirdos. I think anything short of that, and they're going to leave. Because I got to be honest with you, in and of itself, there's a lot of other weirdos down the street. Virginia had 38 fraternities, for goodness sake. So if I didn't like ATO, I could go to Kappa Sig, I could go to Pica, I could go anywhere else down the street. Not Pica. But those guys are too preppy. Those guys are way too preppy. And they just got kicked off campus, as a matter of fact, I heard. But for hazing. That was a big thing. I mean, you had multiple people when you're at the event that were selling you on the idea why that was the one to be at, and why if you didn't do it, you're kind of a loser.
And so when we wade into your pool more strongly, Pastor Bruce, that's when trunk or treat becomes an outreach. That's when Awanas becomes an outreach, when we're not just inviting folks to come to an event, but we're going to folks and we're saying, this is a good thing. In fact, it's not a good thing, it's a great thing. And let me tell you why it's a great thing. So there's a combination of legacy, personal experience, your own growth and progression, and then your own love and your own value of the group with which you belong. So yeah, I think Pastor Bruce certainly he beat that a little bit more than maybe I was intending to at that point. But yeah, if you know guys who are fraternity oriented or guys who are frat veterans, I know guys who are 40 to 60 these days, and they think that fraternal orientation was one of the best things that ever happened to them. I would disagree, because none of that matters at the judgment. You understand? See, none of that matters at the judgment. So if what we're doing today is supposed to matter at the judgment, then doggone it, shouldn't we be beating the drum? Shouldn't we recognize that the things that are probably oriented to Jesus belief are going to look weird to the uninitiated? So our Jesus encounters are to let folks know that the ghostly, I was just reading this week about how many famous celebrities are atheists. It emboldens you with your Jesus encounters to be able to talk to some of these folks and say, sorry, Mr. Dawkins, it's really nice that you want to be a public atheist, but you're wrong. Mm-hmm. But I'm not telling you that's your job to do. Our music is at least to help us recognize that way back in the desert, the Lord said, y'all need, when you worship me, but he didn't say y'all, but when y'all get together, y'all need to sing. And part of the reason that we should value that is there's no other religion where singing is supposed to be a part of the worship.
Amen.
That's important. Steve has introduced something to us to say, you know what? Sometimes Christians are a little backwards. Sometimes we don't understand the big world out there. So let me show you that using this thing that a lot of us think is the devil, which is the internet, let's use that and be informed to understand how to push back when folks approach us with the topic of the day that's way better than Jesus. Prayer, guys, I can't say enough about why we should pray. Men ought always pray. Women ought always pray. The praying should be just a normal kind of effervescence because of the time we've had with the Lord this week. Now we get a chance to do it with our club members. Mm-hmm. Then we have someone who's been gifted by the Lord to be able to say to us specifically what we need to hear. And we need to lock in and listen. And that's why it's cool listening to Mr. Stanley. It's cool listening to David Jeremiah. If you're a MacArthur fan, that's great. But none of those guys know you. So it's cool if you go see Franklin Graham. But Franklin Graham don't know you. Your local guy is the guy that overruns your chapter. He's been praying about you specifically and your particular gang. You've got to listen to what he's got to say. The food part that just creates so much weird. part of our job is to develop relationships, to be Yahweh's family, to develop relationships with Yahweh and with each other. And because we're racing away from the hour-long interval on Sundays, who's got time for relationship building? I've got family and friends to meet, and I've got a dining place I need to get to. By the way, let me share the opposite. When we don't understand why we get together and dine together and spend time together, then it's also not therapeutic because people don't want to waste their time when there's not candid, honest, transparent, and deep conversation to build relationships. I'd rather not waste my time. I would rather go to Slim Chicken or to Taco Cabana than waste my time talking with folks who don't really care to talk about things in depth. So I'm saying that to you folks to say, these are the components of why we do what we do. In addition to the bigger thing I didn't remind us of. We say we're supposed to give 1 day a week. 1 day a week to the Lord. Don't ask me for more than about an hour and a half. And so, folks, the rituals, the traditions, the practices that we have are going to seem strange to the uninitiated because it seems like it's an expense, an investment of time that makes no sense to the folks who either don't understand or don't participate in radical obedience, folks who don't necessarily understand what a closer walk with Jesus looks like. So the feedback is always going to be, y'all need to do, y'all need to do. And guess what? Some of that's going to have merit. But other than that, kind of like Pastor Bruce was saying, you can't come into our fraternity and tell us what to do if you don't even know what a fraternity is. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just some thoughts on some things you're saying. In terms of identity, you're part of this sorority, you're part of this other thing. And there's a certain level of pride that comes with that, self-esteem. And the doing part flows out of the identity with that group. And it's interesting. They're, if you're part of Phi Kappa Delta at Yale University or Skull and Bones or something, you're super, super proud because you're running together with future presidents. And it just gives a huge self-esteem boost, which actually from an eternal perspective is sad.
Yeah.
Extremely sad. And they're wearing this branding proudly, but to continue with the analogy, we have a branding, the seal of the Holy Spirit, that lasts forever. And I'm chewing on this because we'll go into situations where if we're surrounded by a lot of those people, let's be honest, we might be intimidated and feel inferior. And the truth is we have a superior branding and a superior identity. And, of course, we don't want to look at it as, hey, come be part of our club, but be part of this community that extends even beyond us, beyond our local thing, and it extends into the past and into the future and into eternity. And we have a reason to be proud of it and be excited of it. But it was that identity piece that I started chewing on a bit. So you can take it from here.
Yeah. Guys, I've heard kind of, without Steve saying it, but Bruce saying the actual word, there should be an excitement, if not a glee and a joyfulness about whose we are, whose group we belong to, right? And then understanding the components and the mechanisms of what we do and why we do them. Well, that's why you corner somebody in an event and you say, you know what? Church lasts for an hour, maybe where you go, maybe it shouldn't last for an hour. Let me tell you why. Or how much time do you guys spend praying? How much time do you spend praying aloud? How much time do you spend praying where all of your voices are cacophenously joined together? There's a reason why that makes really fun and good sense. So as opposed to sometimes bragging because of how big our church is, or because how shiny our pastor is, or that we're the in-club church to be in, the reason that we're the in-club church is because we're Jesus is. And being able to brag on that and being able to proudly let folks know why we do what we do and the way we do it should be a refining and a delight for us, so that you hear this kind of with Bruce when you're involved with folks and folks say, well, what do you do? Well, I'm going to tell you then what I do, because you just opened the door for me to do that. And I'm going to tell you with a confidence. I'm going to tell you with a sense of glee, and I'm going to tell you with a sense of invite. And unlike the discussion we're having right now, even though there's stratification of sorts, sheep, goats, right? The stratification of sorts, everybody can move out of the goat group and move into the sheep class. That's part of the reason that we want folks to not be a mile wide and an inch deep. We want folks to have depth. We want folks to want to do whatever it takes for the cause of Jesus. So I'm done. Comments before we kind of briefly move to number next.
I have a couple of comments. Number one, I've spoken to a friend of the family who is in Sonic Lodge. Well, there was a Eastern Star and that kind of thing, and he made a comment to me. This is another brotherhood kind of thing. And he said at one time that whenever a member of the lodge called him, he had to drop everything and go do something to help that person or meet their obligation kind of thing. And there's been a number of senses where I'm thinking, you know what, that really is more of a church than it is, a club kind of thing with regard to the whole ritualism. The second thing is, with regard to the obedience, this was yesterday's OC. Just bear with me just a moment. This is entitled Get a Move On. And he uses it's part of a series he's doing in the matter of drudgery. And he uses, and beside this, in 2 Peter 1:5, act. So he says in the beginning of this, he says, you have inherited the divine nature, says Peter in verse 4. Now, and this is OC speaking, not Peter. Screw your attention down and form habits, give diligence, concentrate. And then as he closes he just kind of says, okay, do something about it. At the very end, he says, and this is where I really want to get, the tiniest detail in which I obey has all the omnipotent power of the grace of God behind it. If I do my duty not for duty's sake, but because I believe God is engineering my circumstances, and at the very point of my obedience, the whole superb grace of God is mine through the atonement. And atonement, I've talked about it before. Atonement can be spelled out by breaking up the word at one meant. We're going to be able to be at one with Him through that. So the obedience in the tiniest detail brings out the omnipotent grace of God.
So you've said it before, Brother Gene, that I always struggle a little bit with Oswald Chambers. Now, here's why I struggle with Oswald Chambers. So that's a neat reading. What did that do for your day?
Well, I tell you what, it was one of those things where it's like I said yesterday, and it was one of those things that encouraged me to be more obedient. We talked last week, and the whole story I need to tell you guys later. I'm not sure it's even appropriate for a Jesus encounter, but the obedience led to God moving. And because that happened, I obeyed in a very radical way. Last week, God moved mightily this past week. And this was the encouragement saying, hey, you know what? You did something kind of little, kind of big, and I've been able to do something this week because of that.
Okay. Pastor Bruce?
Steve said something, and kind of what Gene was just hitting on, as much as I don't felt kind of parallel to me. I think there's something there too to this thought. purpose-driven church. I know that that pastor brother has kind of taken it on the chin a lot for some different reasons, but there's something he says in there that Rick Warren says in that book that's really pretty vital. And that is this. It's okay, I'm paraphrasing, it's okay to set your standards high and to have high expectations of people when they actually want to become part of your fellowship. I just say it the way I'm thinking it. I think a lot of people, when they come into churches, smell desperation. Honest to goodness. Oh, thank you for coming. And part of that's because, and it's a conversation I used to have with my dad. Too often times, and this is a marketing statement, too often times you wear out your prospects because you don't have enough of them. Right? And so, there's a lot of churches in America today, and this morning, that are going to have a visitor for the first time in months. And they're going to smother the starch out of them. And they will welcome them in just because they can fog a mirror. And I'm not saying that we need to be an exclusive club like the fraternities you've been talking about. I mean, but there is a sense that we should be willing to say, so what do you bring to the table? How are you going to make our fellowship better? I mean, I think there's a sense of that in Scripture. I mean, there's an idea that, we need a foot. We don't need a 93rd hand, kind of thing. And maybe I'm just barking up the wrong tree, and I'm being a little bit ridiculous. But I think there's a sense that churches operate from a standpoint of feeling like they don't want to drive anybody away because they need them. And I'm sorry, God doesn't need you or me. He invites us in His grace, going to where Gene was banging a little bit there. But you know what I'm saying? It just we have no expectation of people when they come, and that's exactly what we get.
That is one of the paths that is the discussion point today, is that folks want to come and they want to attend and they want to say that they attended, and then that's church membership or church fellowship. And there's more to that, folks. There's more. And even when we take a look at Steve's presentation last week, which has been a phrase on my lips last week of radical obedience. Look, I don't know if we discovered this in the beginning, but Ellen and our lifestyle has a component of that radical obedience attached to it. And here's what I mean by that is we understand the benefits of doing what's crazy in order to be obedient to Jesus and the Holy Spirit these days. We kind of anticipate that there's going to be positive elements that affect, if not improve, our life. But we didn't start out that way. We started out by going, let's see what happens if we change up our agenda and our schedule so that we're more available for you. And so what that didn't have attached to it was if we do this, will you do this for us? So there wasn't a sense of radical obedience put into play because we needed something. There was, if anything, what we were asking was, how do we develop a closer walk with you that also results in a closer walk with each other? And so now we kind of regularly reap the benefits of just putting ourselves in crazy, of doing what seems to be radical obedience. We're inviting some friends over tonight who we may invite next week to worship with us because we know they need Jesus. And every time we get together, the guy will say, I love when you talk to me about Jesus, even though I don't believe in Jesus, because at least you're the only person I've talked with, and it makes sense when I talk with you about who Jesus is, because he's an ex-engineer. So we'll have them over tonight after we go and fraternize with them at the winery and look to invite them and other folks to come back. And see, the point is, the radical obedience here is we're not submitting to something that is encouraging because of answers we need. We already know the answers. The answers are the Lord wants us obedient and he wants our lives as sacrifices. How do we do that? That's the question. And so the fallout from that has been good health. The fallout of that has been quality of life. The fallout from that has been life and more abundantly. And the funny thing is, we used to sing a song when I was a kid in the Black church, and it's called "You Can't Beat God Giving." You can't beat God giving, no matter how you try. The reality is, we have found that by putting ourselves in position to be impacted or impressed or to be able to practice radical obedience, the Lord just goes, "Oh, okay, you're my children. Here. It feels a little bit Solomon-esque because we're not asking for stuff. We're saying, give us opportunities." So why am I talking about that? Because I enjoy watching my wife read devotionals. I enjoy when folks are, the chicken soup and those kind of things. If it moves us to become better, obedient members of the Godhead through his family. Yes, sir.
Kind of, tell me if this works for you, but this is where my mind is going. Theologically, you're describing a relationship with God that is covenantal versus contractual.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of us, I'm not excluding myself, it's often been contractual, even to the point where over the week, Shay and I were talking about this. Part of the contractual agreement with God is, I will feel good today if I do my devotions and check off my list, prayer, Bible reading, and everything else. But I feel like garbage if I don't. Right?
Yeah.
And then there's worse, the expectation that if I do all the right Christian things and check off all the boxes, my life is going to turn out a certain way. And then when it doesn't, we get upset with God because he hasn't fulfilled his part of the contract. As opposed to the covenant, he's the king, and we're laying everything before him. And that, to use that phrase, radical obedience might mean marching straight into the fire.
Correct.
And getting nothing in return.
Correct.
But a byproduct of that is feeling great while you're doing it.
Yeah, agreed. But what it is too, and I think there was really some. I appreciated very, very much Brother Dean's candor last week. And I'm not going to try to use the conjunction that sounds like it's adversarial. However, I do want to share this. When believers understand that unless Jesus comes back, life is finite. That as good as we feel, as much as we like all the things we're doing and that we're going to do and that we take for granted we're going to be able to do over the course of the next week, the truth is, unless Jesus comes back, for us who are authentic, genuine, sincere believers, life is finite. So let me put that plainly. We're going to die. And here's what's icky. We're going to die of something. And we're going to die of something that we can't select. Right. Thank you. Right. So the Lord's at least moved on us on this end to put our lives in the kind of order to anticipate that we're going to die. And I know that sounds morbid. I know it sounds crazy. But you know what? I got Giant Jerry in the room there, and I've got Steve and Sarah, ex-athletes. There's a time from the time you're about 25 to 35 where you believe you're going to stay 25 to 35 forever. And then 37 happens. And then if you're unlucky, 50 happens. And you're going, what happened to 35? Right? So what that suggests is, unless Jesus comes back, he gets the last laugh by the fact that we age. And stuff is gonna happen to us. So how we prepare for that is being understanding that an inevitability of the life we live is that we're gonna die. And sometimes putting ourselves confidently into that position allows us to at least march toward that with a sense of he's really sovereign and he's got this. And as much as I want to worry about it, I can't. Does that make sense? I mean, I know it sounds morbid. I know it sounds radical. But I can tell you that that's the position that Ellen and I, over the years, recognizing our mortality, we've tried to put ourselves in position for. Recognizing that if we really think that we're out of here and in the presence of the Lord, then let's prepare this life for that transition because we're no longer 35.
Preston.
Said for a couple of years now, and it's now probably more poignant than ever. Life is a terminal condition. We're born dying, quite frankly. And so we need to understand that to the point that you just said. We need to be ready. And we need to, because, like you said, and I did something, maybe you didn't catch it. We don't get a chance to choose how we're going to die. I did the ice cream sign. My friend who, got off work, had a bowl of ice cream, and died on the sofa. Yeah, I want that. I'm ready to choose that kind of thing. But you know what? It's not that we get that anymore. Or ever. It's one of those things where it's like, it could be, and they've told me so far, it's definitely not Parkinson's. That's good. But I was talking to the doctor, and I said, I hope that if it had been Parkinson's, I would have been dealing a little bit better than Robin Williams did. And maybe more like Michael J. Fox, who's been strong into his 60s with this. So the point is, we don't get to choose. It could be, I this last week, I don't know whether or not I'm going to be a healthy mind and a broken body, Stephen Hawking, or am I going to be a healthy body with a mind that can't remember diddly? So, or no diddly, or ask several times, what did you say, kind of thing. So we don't get to choose. The deterioration is inevitable. We are in a terminal condition from the moment we're born.
The fraternity to which we belong through Jesus' blood
Yeah.
allows us to speak into the lives of a Robin Williams, to speak into the lives. By the way, if you guys don't recognize, a TikTok thing right now is young people committing suicide.
Yep.
It is a thing. But we have an opportunity to speak into these people's lives to help them to know that death is not the end, but death is a terminal situation. And we should be grateful to be able to say, you know what, I'm afraid about this stuff the way you are too. But let me tell you, it's not the end. And I know the outcome, and I need to share that with you because it's better than what your fears are. That's part of the club membership. That's part of what we know to be able to corner someone the way that Bruce presented and say, this is why you need to participate. This is why you need to be initiated into my group, into my family. Because we have answers for this stuff.
Amen.
Even when the doctors shake their heads, even when our medical condition is out of our control and someone else has to help clean us or carry us or take care of us, we know the answer to that. And that boldness and that confidence should allow us to be able to tell folks, this is why we do what we do, this is what we do, and this isn't the end of all there is just because all of your senses say it is.
Amen.
Other thoughts before I shut up? Thank you, Steve, by the way, for letting me cut in there.
Steve put a really good, somewhat theological point on what you've been talking about, drawing that distinction between covenant and contract. Because I think, even though I said what I did about Rick Warren, I didn't like the fact that when they got to the point of having somebody become a member, they sign on the dotted line. I always thought that was a little bit creepy. Good idea, not necessarily did it get played out all the way. And a lot of people aren't going to do that. And it feels like a contract at that point. And kind of where you've been this whole time is trying to imbue in somebody a covenant relationship with that fraternity, ride or die kind of mindset that's kind of going on there. And it is like Jesus. I mean, we're not under the law, because if we're in that relationship, the law doesn't matter. We never run afoul of the law, because we're just so tight on our relationship with Christ that the law's way down the road. And kind of midstream what you said about people doing an hour in church. I don't want to get to a point where I start saying, well, they're good because they're 3 hours and they're bad because they're an hour. I don't want to play that. And you didn't say that, but I don't want to get to that point. But I think a lot of folks are just in a contract situation. That's where Steve was kind of banging. It's like, okay, I've done what I'm supposed to do. I made an offering. I came to the service. I brought my Bible. I shook 3 hands, and I'm out the door. Right. So, can we as followers of Christ excite people about a relationship, which is what you've been asking, as opposed to, hey, come join our club, and oh, by the way, here's the rules. Because that sure feels like what's going on in American Christianity today. There's a lot of people out there who have reduced Christ, unfortunately, to the law.
Or it feels like a bait and switch,
Oh!
Church, come, and then, like you said, oh, you really want to be a part of us? Now you need to start on the dotted line. Like, dude, you just Amwayed me. What the heck?
That hurt.
Yeah, that's kind of.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Something else you're making me think of, the challenges of Jesus that we looked at. And I mean, was Jesus guilty of that? I don't know. But he said, come and see, come check it out. But there was a point when he said, follow me. And there were cultural implications of that. And they knew, oh, okay, I'm going to be committed to this thing right now. And then it went deeper to, now follow me and make me fishers of men. But I'm going back to, hey, check it out. By the way, being in a covenant community, I don't want to say these are the rules, but these are the implications. This is the impact of that. Somehow we got to be honest with people and not do a bait and switch type of thing. I got to think through that a lot more. But circling back to a little bit what Brutus was saying, when we look at it through this contractual lens, we can hear everything that Preston is saying as, oh, we need to do more, right? We need to do more to fulfill part of the covenant. So I'm not going to shake hands and then go, I'm going to look at my watch and make sure that I'm there for at least another hour. And it's just another check mark, as opposed to it flowing out of this relationship with the Lord, this covenant. And then you're looking at your watch like, oh, dang, an hour went by. I didn't realize, Do you see the difference, or where I'm kind of going with that?
Well, it's the same problem that teachers are having with the SOLs. They teach to the answer instead of being able to teach a kid to think logically, to think critically, to love learning and want to know that stuff, as opposed to, you got to pass this test, right?
Yeah. We got to get you through the membership class. We got to get you through the next class.
We got to get you on this team or this committee, or, we got to get you involved, because if we don't, we're going to lose you.
Jerry's a great example of what you guys are talking about. Is if you work alongside Jerry for a period of time, at some point you're going to go, man, I'd like to either do what it is he does. If not, I'd like to do what he does the way he does it. That's what then moves people to become involved with things as opposed to needing to place them in a position where we're going to lose them. And when I look back over the scope of Steve's teaching with us the past several weeks, as much as I admire many of the American great clergy, and I mean going back to the late, if not 1700s, 1800s, and unfortunately I'm going to say this curse word, a lot of the early great ones were Presbyterians. But saying that, there was an emphasis, probably from the late 1600s to about 1950s, of teaching people a sense of who Jesus is and who Yahweh God is and the Holy Spirit through a sense of fear, through a sense of right and wrong, a sense of following the rules and getting something because you followed the rules. And when you take a look at the bulk of Steve's teaching, Steve demonstrated in the teaching, if we were ardent, Jesus didn't teach about necessarily right and wrong. He really taught about relationships. Even when folks were caught in sin, he didn't say, you're a bad, you're a wrong person. He presented the situation to them to have them understand you broke a relationship. You broke the very, very best that was out there for you. And Jesus modeled this 2,000 years ago. We kind of reshaped it as the United States. And right now, the right and wrong culture, the rule-following culture is not going to work today. And one of Steve's strengths is relationships, building relationships, teaching relationships. That's what we need to connect with folks. That's what we need to help folks understand what the church is, what we are, why we do what we do, the way that we do, and then to have expectations. Because when you have expectations, it's like that boyfriend, girlfriend, really boyfriend, girlfriend, fiance, husband and wife situation is you grouse about stuff, but you do it. You build the shelves in the garage to perfection because not only are you pleased with the job, but your spouse is pleased with the job. You go and you do the yard work, even when you have allergies, not because just the lawn looks good, but because your wife is very pleased when you do that. Relationship dictates obedience. And sometimes the closer the relationship, radical obedience. There's stuff that you're in tune to now you probably never would have been unless you have a certain kind of relationship. And that's, guys, that's why we spend a lot of time doing what we do, is to help the work friend and church friends, work real and church friends all become intertwined. Help your work friends because of your church friends become church friends. Help your real friends become church friends because of your church friends. And when I say church friends, what I really mean is the family of Yahweh God.